Hello, I'm Ed Raby, otherwise known as the Rabid Atheist, former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. You're free to like or dislike the video, so feel free to hit those buttons. And I would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the channel and hit your notification bell for more content as it is released. You're also free to comment below and to share this video as much as you would like. The purpose of this channel is educational, in particular in regards to deconversion issues, atheist issues, and Bible and theology in relationship to both of those. This channel is basically dedicated to the idea of education. Today is another in the series of the Bible contradictions, and so I'm dealing with a very interesting subject and one of the more difficult ones that I had to eventually say couldn't be reconciled, even though I tried very hard, and that is the idea of God being love. Now, the Bible's claim is not that God displays love. The claim is God is the epitome, the definition of love. In other words, He is, God equals love. Okay, He is love. Okay, now we also don't have to be short on a definition of love, because we also have a definition in the Bible of what love is supposed to be, found in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. And the text defines love as love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no records of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Now, the great challenge of biblical studies, in my opinion, is to reconcile these two ideas with the things that God actually does in the Bible. When we talk about love is patient, we also have to say that if God is love, then I can place the word God in the place of every definition of love here, and that would be perfectly applicable. Then the text reads a little bit differently. It says, God is patient, God is kind, God does not envy, God does not boast, God is not proud. God does not dishonor others. God is not self-seeking. God is not easily angered. God keeps no record of wrongs. God does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. God always protects. God always trusts. God always hopes. And God always perseveres. Well, that creates some very interesting biblical problems. God is not always patient. On several occasions, God loses his patience even with his own people and kills them. God's patience is not infinite, but the description of love here is that God is patient, love is patient. In other words, they are equated. There is times, I understand that some people have a definition of patience that is not infinite, and I don't want to dwell on this part too long because I do have a lot of ground to cover here, but the fact of the matter is, there are many times that it says that God got angered, and he openly says that he's about to lose his patience. I think one of the great examples of God about to lose his top is when he's talking with Moses at the burning bush. As Moses continues to find excuses of why he can't serve God, God seems to get, in the passage, more and more angry and more agitated. That's not somebody who is patient and has an infinite amount of time. This also brings up a theological problem. If God is timeless, that is, time is irrelevant to him, which I don't think any concept of God really works without making time relevant, then patience really isn't a thing. God can be as patient or infinitely patient as he likes. It seems strange that God would get angry at anything because he knows he could always wait out the person. Or if a bunch of people are being evil, he just simply has to wait them out until they're dead. He doesn't have to do anything. And yet God repeatedly interferes with human affairs, apparently because of a lack of patience and waiting for them to die. Also saying God is kind on occasion, but other times God is very cruel. I mean, when you look at some of the things that God does, in particular the ordering of genocides on a regular basis, you begin to realize that God is not exactly always the kindest of individuals to humanity. It really gets interesting with God on some occasions in the Bible where he basically says, you know what, to hell with y'all. And the psalmist may talk about his loving kindness towards him, but he also talks about God's wrath towards his enemies. A very strange concept if God is so kind. God does not envy. That's funny. If God is not jealous or doesn't envy, then why does he openly say that he's a jealous God? He deliberately contradicts it. You cannot have God not being jealous or not being envious, and then having turn around in his own 10 Commandments, or what is reported as the 10 Commandments, is saying, I'm a jealous God, and I will suffer my wrath on anybody who doesn't respect that. God does not boast. Also, if God is love, the one thing God does do is boast a lot. I created the universe. Who are you to question me, is what he tells Job. God boasts on a lot of things simply to stand on his own authority. The whole issue of God's authority rests on God boasting in his creative accomplishments. So this doesn't really work either. God is not proud. If he's not proud, then why does he demand worship of him and worship of him alone? It seems to me that an unprideful God wouldn't give two rats' asses about who people worshipped. But God is very exclusive. He insists on people worshiping him. And that seems to be a very prideful and arrogant thing to do. It becomes interesting when we get a little bit farther in this definition where it says God does not dishonor others. God repeatedly embarrasses people that disobey him. He often puts them in bad situations. I don't know how anybody could be more dishonored than being killed, simply because they disagree with the Almighty. And yet God does this on a regular basis. If love is not seeking, then God is not self-seeking. Well, then what the shit? What is God doing? If God isn't self-interested, then why does he care what human beings do? It seems to me that he has a self-interest, that there's some goal he's trying to achieve for himself. This is where also the definition of love here breaks down a little bit, because I don't think it's possible to be completely non-self-interested. In fact, I would say self-love and self-interest create some positive things in this world. And yet love, being not self-seeking, means God is also not self-seeking. Now, we could argue, what could God possibly gain? But the fact of the matter is we don't really know. And God, if he's seeking to have a relationship with people, he is seeking something for himself. It doesn't make any sense. And logically, the idea of people not being self-seeking or self-interested just doesn't make any sense. Every person who has a personality, every kind of sentient being, it seems to me, would have some sort of sense of self-preservation. And if that's the case, then they're self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Over and over, the Bible does indeed say that God is slow to wrath, except when he does lose it, he loses it. Case in point, the flood of the universe, according to Genesis, where he basically floods the entire world because he gets pissed off. Now, it says he grieves over it, so maybe he's not angry in that passage. But it doesn't change the fact that this passage of Noah and his flood are going to cause massive problems to the rest of the definition of love in a moment. But the fact of the matter is, over and over, the Bible speaks of God getting angry. Maybe he's not easily angry, but it's interesting that this definition of love allows for anger. It's just you can't be quick to fall and be angry. And apparently God, maybe he does keep this one. It keeps no record of wrongs. Then why is there a heaven or a hell? If God keeps no record of wrongs, what's the point of sending Jesus for grace? If there's no record of wrongs, then why in the world would there be a hell in the first place? Why would there be any kind of punishment whatsoever? God would simply forgive, and he would simply let things go. But that doesn't make any sense if God keeps no record of wrongs. It's clear that God does keep a record of wrongs, and there's even in the book of Revelation, it talks about the book of life and the book of the deeds of people. It's obvious that God does keep record of deeds, wrongs, rights, and whether or not somebody has inherited eternal life. This would seem to indicate a record of wrongs and a record of rights. And yet it says that love doesn't do this, and God is love. Apparently, there's a little bit of a contradiction there. Because if God keeps no record of wrongs, the whole sending his son to die on the cross, the whole issue of grace and works and all the rest of it that go along with salvation seems to be kind of a waste of time. If God could simply be love and keep no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. I would say that the first part might be true of God, but it greatly depends on how you define evil. If you define evil as causing harm to another, then God is one of the greater perpetrators of evil in the Bible. If, however, you define evil as malicious intent, well, then maybe God gets off the hook here. But it doesn't change the fact if love rejoices in the truth, and thus God rejoices in the truth, God would have no problem with presenting the truth in his own book, the literal truth that actually lines up with the world that we live in. And yet he doesn't do that. As I pointed out in my previous Bible contradiction, this is one of the great Bible contradictions, that it seems to me if the book is truly and genuinely written by God, it would have accurate information about how the universe works. But it doesn't, and therefore perpetuates a falsehood and not the truth. Verse 7 says it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love always protects. Interesting. Always, huh? Every single time. All means all. And yet God is noted for lifting his protection from his people many, many times when the Israelites are invaded, attacked, killed, their women are taken captive, raped, so on and so forth. God always protects, really. Well, let's take that to the modern day. This is one of the great problems of theodicy, isn't it? You see, if a person is love, it says love always protects, and God is love, so God would always protect. But it's pretty clear that God doesn't always protect people. He certainly doesn't protect them from sickness. He doesn't protect them from natural disaster all the time. If he truly loved each one of his children, he would want to keep them safe from harm. But God doesn't do that. In fact, people suffer cancer, they suffer rape, they suffer death, they suffer destruction of everything that they own, and God doesn't do one damn thing about it all the time. I think the word all kinds of makes it a contradiction. If I had the power and the knowledge to stop cancer or stop any evil from befalling any human being on planet Earth, I would do it. But God apparently doesn't do it. And this means that I can at least conceive of myself in one sense as better than God. If I had his power, I would certainly protect people. I would make sure that no woman was ever raped, no person ever died of cancer ever again or any other disease. I would let them live as long as I could. I certainly wouldn't have kept them from the tree of life if it would allow for immortality if they wanted to choose that path. Always trust. How do you trust somebody? How do you say that you trust somebody when your own prophets will tell you that you deceived them? How does God always trust? God doesn't always trust people. It's clear that he says that, certain people are evil and therefore he's going to bring them to ruin. How can you say you're trusting somebody if you're about to destroy them? How are you always trusting? That doesn't make any sense either. Always hopes. Well, this is contradicted by the said flood story once again. Always hopes. If God always hoped, why would he bring any cataclysm to destroy anybody? He would believe fully in his heart that his children would turn around, that eventually they would repent. And even if they didn't, he would still be kind to them and patient with them, waiting for them to do so. And even if they were to pass into death, he wouldn't do anything about it because he would be waiting for his children to turn around because he loves them so much and he hopes so much for them, no matter what dark path their life may take. He would be the living epitome of hope springs eternal, but he doesn't, and nor does he do any of it. Always perseveres. Well, what in the world does God have to persevere through? See, the logical contradiction to me here is perseverance doesn't seem to be something that you'd equate with God at all. If God is omniscient, omnipotent, and everywhere present, plus he has all the resources, plus, quite frankly, he's unassailable, plus he's timeless and doesn't suffer the ravages of time, what can he possibly persevere through? Its perseverance would be unnecessary. Why would God be love and love be that which always perseveres? It doesn't make any sense, given the nature and the attributes of God. Now, I have just tipped and scratched the surface of the iceberg of the problem of God being loved, and I certainly haven't gone into depth, in large part because in this size of this video, in the length of this video performance, there's a lot of things that more could be said. But my largest problem with this particular Bible contradiction is this, that really, is God all that loving in the Bible? He puts his people in awkward positions. When they piss him off, he basically leaves them to their enemies. When he, doesn't like what some of them do, he destroys them himself and kills them. If people are truly, every person truly is God's children, I've been mad at my kids a lot of times, but I would never have thought of killing them. And any parent that kills a child, we would automatically say that they didn't love the child. And yet God does it all the time throughout the scriptures and gets a pass for it. I don't think we can say God is love. God is something. He's tyrannical at times. He's dictatorial at times. He shows a complete lack of patience and often loses his temper. He comes up with a plan to redeem humanity, but it involves more suffering and death. He can't seem to simply bring it to himself to just forgive humanity and move on. He can't seem to really find that patience and the hope that his own book supposedly talks about. We'd either have to conclude that the definition of love, as found in 1 Corinthians 13:4-7, is garbage and doesn't really present a realistic view of love, or we would have to conclude that God doesn't live up to the definition, even though the Bible clearly says in 1 John that God is love. We'd have to conclude, then, that perhaps there's a very large contradiction here, and that's exactly what indeed we should conclude. And hopefully, some days, by pondering on these thoughts, I can convince you to be a rabid atheist like myself. In the meantime, this is Ed Raby, also known as the Rabid Atheist, signing off and wishing you a good day.